The October wind cut across the Montana plains like a knife, carrying with it the scent of dying grass and distant snow. Jake Morrison pulled his worn Stetson lower over his eyes as he guided his horse along the fence line of his ranch. At 52, he had spent most of his life on this land, inherited from his father and grandfather before him. The routine of checking cattle and mending fences had become as natural as breathing. It was during one of these routine rides that Jake heard it, a sound so faint he almost missed it over the whistling wind. A voice, thin and desperate, calling out from somewhere beyond the ridge. He reined in his horse, a sturdy quarter horse named Buck, and listened intently. There it was again. Clearer this time. Someone was calling for help. Jake spurred Buck toward the sound, his heart already racing. In all his years on the ranch, he had encountered lost hikers, injured hunters, and stranded motorists. But something about this cry felt different, more urgent, more frightened. As he crested the small hill, Jake saw her. A young woman, maybe in her mid-20s, was standing beside what appeared to be an overturned ATV. Her clothes were torn and dirty, her dark hair tangled with burrs and debris. She was waving frantically in his direction, and even from a distance, he could see the desperation in her movements. "Help me, please," she called out as he approached. "Please, I need help." Jake dismounted quickly, his boots hitting the ground with purpose. The woman was shaking, whether from cold or fear. He couldn't tell. Her eyes darted constantly over his shoulder, as if expecting something or someone to appear at any moment. "Ma'am, what happened here?" Jake asked, keeping his voice calm and steady. "Are you hurt?" The woman looked at him with eyes that held more pain than any physical injury could cause. "Free me. I need," she began, then stopped, looking around frantically again. "They'll be back soon." He said he was just going for more rope. Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. The overturned ATV, the woman's torn clothes, her obvious terror, pieces of a terrible puzzle were beginning to form in his mind. "Who'll be back?" "Ma'am, what's your name?" "Sarah," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder again. "Sarah Chen. You have to help me get away from here. I can't go back with them." "Them?" Jake moved closer, noting the rope burns on her wrists, partially hidden by the sleeves of her jacket. "Sarah, who did this to you?" Sarah's story came out in broken fragments, interrupted by her constant vigilance of their surroundings. She had been camping with friends near Glacier National Park when their group was approached by 3 men. What started as a seemingly friendly encounter had quickly turned sinister. Her friends had been forced to drive away at gunpoint, while she was kept behind. "They said they knew these mountains better than anyone," Sarah explained, her voice barely above a whisper. "That no one would ever find me if I tried to run. They've been moving me from place to place for 3 days. Jake felt his jaw clench as the full horror of the situation became clear. This was human trafficking, something he had only read about in news reports. The idea that it was happening here, on his own land, made his stomach turn. "The one who seemed to be in charge, he went back to their truck to get more rope," Sarah continued. "He said they were going to move me again tonight, to somewhere much further away. I managed to roll their ATV when he left me with the younger one." The kid panicked and ran after him. Jake looked at the overturned vehicle, then back at Sarah. "How long ago was this? Maybe 20 minutes? I've been trying to right the ATV, but it's too heavy." Her voice broke slightly. "I thought I was going to die out here. I thought I was going to die out here." Without hesitation, Jake grabbed the radio from his belt. The ranch was too remote for cell service, but he maintained radio contact with his foreman, Pete, who lived near the main road. "Pete, this is Jake. I need you to call 911 immediately. We have a situation out here." Sarah grabbed his arm. "No," they said. "If I involved the police, they'd kill me and come after my family. They know where I live, where my parents live." Jake looked into her terrified eyes and made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "Sarah, I need you to trust me. These men are criminals, and they need to be stopped." But first, we need to get you somewhere safe. He helped her onto Buck's back, then swung up behind her. Hold on tight. We're going back to my house. As they rode toward the ranch house, Jake could feel Sarah trembling against his back. Every few seconds, she would turn to look behind them, expecting to see their pursuers cresting the hill. Jake pushed Buck harder than he normally would, knowing that time was critical. The ranch house came into view as the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the valley. It was a modest two-story building, weathered by decades of Montana winters but solid and welcoming. Jake had lived alone since his wife died 5 years earlier, and the house had become his sanctuary. "We'll call the sheriff from here," Jake said as he helped Sarah down from the horse. "He's a good man. Someone I've known for 20 years. You can trust him." But as they reached the front porch, Sarah collapsed. The stress and terror of the last 3 days, combined with what Jake suspected was dehydration and exhaustion, finally caught up with her. He caught her before she hit the ground and carried her inside. Jake laid Sarah on the couch in his living room and covered her with a blanket. She was unconscious but breathing steadily. He filled a glass with water and placed it on the coffee table beside her, then stepped into the kitchen to make the call that would bring the outside world crashing into their quiet valley. Sheriff Tom Bradley answered on the second ring. "Jake, Pete said you had an emergency." "Tom, I need you to get out here right away and bring backup. I've got a kidnapping victim, and her captors might still be in the area." There was a pause. "Are you serious?" "Jake, this is Montana." "Not." "I'm dead serious, Tom. This woman has been held for 3 days. She escaped when I found her, but the men who took her are still out there. I'm on my way. Don't do anything stupid until I get there." Jake hung up the phone and returned to the living room. Sarah was awake, sitting up and sipping the water he had left for her. Her color was better, but the fear in her eyes remained constant. "The sheriff is coming," Jake told her. "He's a good man." Sarah nodded but didn't look convinced. "What if they come here before he arrives? What if they're watching us right now?" Jake moved to the window and peered out at the gathering darkness. The thought had occurred to him as well. His ranch was isolated, and while that usually meant peace and quiet, tonight it felt dangerously exposed. "I've got guns," Jake said simply, "and I know this land better than any strangers ever could." As if to test his words, Buck whinnied loudly from outside, a sound Jake had learned to interpret over the years. Someone was coming. Sarah's face went white. "They found us." Jake moved quickly to his gun cabinet, retrieving a shotgun and checking that it was loaded. "Stay down and away from the windows," he instructed Sarah. "No matter what happens, don't show yourself." The sound of an approaching vehicle grew louder, and Jake could see headlights cutting through the darkness. But as the vehicle drew closer, he recognized the distinct rumble of Sheriff Bradley's patrol car. "It's okay," Jake called to Sarah, setting the shotgun aside. "It's the sheriff." Sheriff Bradley stepped out of his patrol car, followed by 2 deputies Jake didn't recognize. Tom Bradley was a tall, lean man in his late 50s, with the kind of weathered face that spoke of decades spent outdoors. He had been sheriff of their county for 15 years and had earned Jake's respect and trust. "Jake." Tom nodded as he approached the house. "Where's the victim?" "Jake." "Jake. Inside. Her name is Sarah Chen." "Tom, she's terrified. These men threatened her family." Tom's expression grew grim. "Let me talk to her." Inside, Sheriff Bradley's manner was gentle but professional as he questioned Sarah. She told her story again, this time with more details. The men had been well organized and clearly experienced. They had known exactly where to take her to avoid main roads and populated areas. "Do you think you could identify them?" Tom asked. Sarah nodded. "I'll never forget their faces." "Sarah, good. We've got an artist who can work with you on sketches. But first, I need to know, do you have any idea where they might have taken you? Any landmarks you remember?" "There was an old mining building," Sarah said, closing her eyes to concentrate, "and a stream that ran right next to it. The building had some kind of metal wheel, like from an old mine." Jake and Tom exchanged glances. They both knew the area she was describing. That's the old Copper Creek mine, Jake said. About 15 miles northeast of here. We need to move fast, Tom said, standing up. Jake, I'm leaving Deputy Martinez here with you and Miss Chen. My other deputy and I are going to check out that mine site. I'm coming with you, Jake said immediately. No, you're not. This is police business now. But Jake's expression was determined. Tom, this is my land they're operating on. My fence they cut to get onto my property. This is personal now. Sheriff Bradley looked at Jake for a long moment, then nodded reluctantly. Stay behind us and do exactly what I say. As the men prepared to leave, Sarah grabbed Jake's hand. Be careful, she whispered. The leader, the one who went for rope, there's something wrong with him. He enjoys this. Jake squeezed her hand reassuringly. We'll get them. The drive to the old mine site was tense and quiet. Jake rode with Sheriff Bradley, while Deputy Johnson followed in a second patrol car. The moon was nearly full, providing enough light to see the rough terrain clearly. There, Jake pointed as they approached the mine site. That's their truck. A large pickup truck sat near the abandoned mining building, exactly as Sarah had described. There were no lights visible, but that didn't mean the site was empty. We go in quiet, Tom whispered into his radio. Assume they're armed and dangerous. What happened next would haunt Jake Morrison for the rest of his life, changing forever his understanding of evil and his own capacity for violence. The abandoned mine site loomed before them in the moonlight, its skeletal remains casting eerie shadows across the rocky ground. Jake could feel his heart pounding as they approached on foot, leaving their vehicles a quarter-mile back. Sheriff Bradley moved with the practiced stealth of his military background, while Deputy Johnson flanked them from the right. Jake had insisted on coming. But now, crouched behind a pile of old mining equipment, he wondered if he was prepared for what they might find. The stories Sarah had told him kept running through his mind, each detail more disturbing than the last. The truck sat empty near the main building, but Jake could see a faint glow coming from inside the structure. Not electric light, it flickered like a campfire or lantern. Sheriff Bradley hand-signaled for them to move closer. As they approached, voices became audible from within the building. Jake strained to listen, and what he heard made his blood run cold. She's been gone too long, a harsh voice was saying. That ATV should have been an easy fix. Maybe she really did get it stuck, came a younger voice, uncertain and nervous. Danny, use your brain, the first voice snapped. Girls like that don't know how to drive those things properly. She probably rolled it trying to escape. Jake watched Sheriff Bradley's jaw tighten. They were listening to Sarah's captors, casually discussing her as if she were livestock. So what do we do, Marcus? The younger voice asked. We find her. And when we do, she's going to wish she hadn't tried to run. Sheriff Bradley turned to Jake and Deputy Johnson, pointing toward different sides of the building. They were going to surround it. Jake nodded, understanding the plan. But as he began to move toward his assigned position, everything went wrong. A loose piece of mining equipment shifted under his foot, sending a metallic clang echoing across the site. The voices inside immediately stopped. What was that? Marcus's voice was sharp, alert. Probably just the wind, Danny said, but he didn't sound convinced. Jake froze, barely breathing. Sheriff Bradley was already moving, knowing their cover was blown. Police! He shouted. Come out with your hands visible. The response was immediate and violent. The lantern inside was extinguished, plunging the area into near darkness. Jake heard the sound of metal scraping against stone, then saw muzzle flashes from inside the building as gunshots rang out. Sheriff Bradley dove for cover behind an old mining cart, returning fire. Deputy Johnson was pinned down behind a concrete foundation. Jake found himself trapped in the open, with nowhere to go but a shallow depression in the rocky ground. There's 3 of them, Sheriff Bradley called out during a break in the gunfire. Jake? You okay? Yeah. Jake called back, though his hands were shaking as he gripped the pistol Sheriff Bradley had given him before they left the vehicles. The shooting continued for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Then Jake heard something that chilled him. the sound of an engine starting from behind the building. There was another way out. "They're running!" he shouted, standing up despite the danger. That's when he saw him. Marcus stepped out from behind the building. Not running like the others, but walking deliberately toward Jake. In the moonlight, Jake could see that Marcus was a large man, probably in his 40s, with the kind of build that spoke of both physical strength and mean disposition. But it was his eyes that Jake would never forget, empty of anything resembling human compassion. "You're the rancher," Marcus said, as if he were discussing the weather. "The one who found our property." Jake raised his pistol, but Marcus was faster than his size suggested. Before Jake could react, Marcus had closed the distance between them. A massive hand knocked the gun away, and Jake found himself on the ground with Marcus standing over him. "You have any idea how much trouble you've caused?" Marcus asked conversationally. "That girl was worth a lot of money to some very important people." Jake struggled to his feet, his rancher's strength serving him well. "She's not property. She's a human being." Marcus laughed, a sound completely devoid of humor. "Human being? Son, you've got a lot to learn about how the world really works." Jake had been in his share of fights over the years: bar fights, disputes with neighboring ranchers, the occasional drunk cowboy. But this was different. Marcus fought like a man who enjoyed inflicting pain, who had done this many times before. The fight was brutal and desperate. Marcus was younger and clearly experienced in violence, but Jake had the fury of a man defending everything he believed in. They grappled among the mining debris, each trying to gain an advantage. Jake managed to grab a piece of rusted metal pipe, swinging it at Marcus's head. Marcus ducked, but the pipe caught him across the shoulder, spinning him around. For a moment, Jake thought he had won. Then Marcus pulled a knife. "Now we're going to finish this proper," Marcus said, circling Jake like a predator. "And then I'm going to pay a visit to your house. That girl and I have unfinished business." Something inside Jake snapped at those words. The thought of this monster anywhere near Sarah, the image of what this man had already done to her, filled him with a rage he didn't know he possessed. Jake feinted left, then dove right, tackling Marcus around the waist. They both went down hard, rolling across the rocky ground. The knife skittered away in the darkness. Jake found himself on top of Marcus, his hands around the other man's throat. "She's just a kid," Jake said through gritted teeth. "She's somebody's daughter. She's somebody's daughter." Marcus tried to speak, but Jake's grip was too tight. The man's eyes began to bulge, and still Jake squeezed harder. All the evil this man had done, all the lives he had destroyed, all the pain he had caused, Jake wanted to end it forever. "Jake! Jake, let him go!" Sheriff Bradley's voice seemed to come from far away. Jake looked up to see Tom standing over them, his weapon drawn but not pointed at either of them. "He's unconscious, Jake. You can let go now." Jake looked down at Marcus's face, purple in the moonlight, and slowly released his grip. His hands were shaking uncontrollably. "Tom, I almost—" "Yeah, I know. But you didn't." Deputy Johnson appeared with handcuffs, and together they secured Marcus while Jake sat on a nearby rock, trying to process what had just happened. He had come within seconds of becoming a killer. "The other two got away," Deputy Johnson reported. "But we've got their truck. And this one will talk eventually." Sheriff Bradley sat down beside Jake. "You saved that girl's life today, and probably the lives of other girls these men would have taken." Jake nodded, but he felt no satisfaction. "Tom, when I had my hands around his throat, I wanted to kill him. I really wanted to. But you didn't," Tom repeated. "That's what matters." As they waited for the ambulance and additional backup to arrive, Jake learned more about the operation they had stumbled into. Marcus, whose real name was Marcus Kellison, was wanted in 3 states for human trafficking. The abandoned mine had been used as a way station, a place to hold victims while arrangements were made to move them to buyers. "We've been tracking this ring for 2 years, Sheriff Bradley explained. "You finding Sarah Chen probably saved a dozen other girls." Jake looked at the unconscious form of Marcus Kellison and felt something he had never experienced before. A deep, abiding knowledge of how thin the line was between civilization and savagery. He had always thought of himself as a peaceful man, someone who solved problems with words and hard work. Tonight, he had discovered a capacity for violence that shook him to his core. The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Marcus had been taken away in the ambulance, conscious but refusing to speak. The other two members of his group were still at large, but roadblocks had been set up throughout the region. "Will she be safe now?" Jake asked as they pulled into his driveway. "We'll have to see what Marcus tells us," Tom replied. "But my guess is that with their operation blown and their leader in custody, the others will disappear. They're businessmen, not avengers." Inside the house, they found Sarah asleep on the couch, Deputy Martinez reading quietly in a nearby chair. She woke when they entered, immediately alert and fearful, until she saw Jake's face. "Did you find them?" "We got the leader," Jake told her. "The other two escaped, but they won't be back." Sarah began to cry. Not tears of fear this time, but of relief. Jake sat down beside her, unsure of what to say or do. "Thank you," she whispered. "You saved my life." Jake nodded, but inside, he was still wrestling with what had happened at the mine site. He had looked into the face of pure evil tonight, and in doing so, had seen a darkness in himself that would take time to understand and accept. The weeks that followed were unlike anything Jake Morrison had ever experienced. The story made national news. Montana rancher helps FBI break major trafficking ring, and suddenly his quiet ranch was the center of unwanted attention. News trucks lined his driveway for 3 days straight, and his phone rang constantly with interview requests that he politely declined. But it wasn't the media attention that kept Jake awake at night. It was the memory of his hands around Marcus Kellison's throat, and the terrible knowledge that he had wanted to squeeze the life out of another human being. Sarah stayed at the ranch for 2 weeks while the FBI conducted their investigation. Her parents flew in from Oregon, tearful and grateful beyond words. Her father, a quiet man named David Chen, shook Jake's hand for a full minute without speaking, tears streaming down his face. "There aren't words," David finally managed. "Our daughter. You brought our daughter back to us." Sarah's mother, Linda, was more vocal. She insisted on cooking elaborate meals for Jake, cleaning his house, and generally treating him like a hero. Jake appreciated the kindness, but every gesture of gratitude made him more uncomfortable with the praise. He hadn't told anyone about what had almost happened at the mine site. Not the FBI agents who interviewed him. Not Sarah's parents. Not even Sarah herself. Only Sheriff Bradley knew how close Jake had come to crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. During Sarah's stay, Jake found himself watching her carefully. She was resilient in a way that amazed him, but he could see the trauma lingering beneath her brave exterior. She jumped at sudden noises, had trouble sleeping, and always positioned herself near exits when in a room with other people. It was during one of their quiet conversations on the porch that Sarah brought up something that surprised him. "You're different than when you first found me," she observed one evening as they watched the sunset paint the mountains orange and red. "Different how?" "Sadder. More thoughtful. Like you're carrying something heavy." Jake was quiet for a long time, considering his words. "Sometimes, when we face real evil, we learn things about ourselves we didn't want to know." Sarah studied his face in the fading light. "What did you learn?" "What did you learn?" Jake looked out across his land, the peaceful valley that had been his sanctuary for 52 years. "I learned that I'm capable of things I never thought I was. Dark things." "You mean what happened with Marcus?" Jake turned to her, surprised. "You know? Sheriff Bradley told me. He was worried about you." Sarah leaned forward in her chair. "Jake, that man destroyed lives. He was planning to destroy mine. What you felt, what you wanted to do, that was human. That was normal." "Was it?" Jake asked. "Because it didn't feel normal. It felt like something broken inside me." Sarah was quiet for a moment, then spoke with a wisdom that seemed older than her 25 years. "Maybe it wasn't something breaking. Maybe it was something waking up. The part of you that protects people, that stands between evil and innocence. Maybe you discovered you're a warrior, not just a rancher." Jake considered her words, but the weight in his chest remained. He had always prided himself on being a peaceful man, someone who solved problems through patience and hard work. The discovery that he could feel such murderous rage, that he could come so close to taking a life, had shaken his fundamental understanding of who he was. The FBI investigation revealed the full scope of the trafficking operation. Marcus Kellison and his associates had been operating for over 5 years, moving victims through a network of rural properties across 4 states. The abandoned mine on Jake's land was just one of several way stations they used. Agent Rebecca Santos, the lead investigator, visited Jake several times during the 2 weeks. She was a serious woman in her 40s who had been working trafficking cases for over a decade. "We've been after Kellison for 3 years," she told Jake during their final meeting. "He was careful, smart, and completely ruthless. Without your intervention, we might never have caught him. What happens now? He's facing federal charges in multiple jurisdictions. With Sarah's testimony and the physical evidence we found, he's looking at life in prison." Agent Santos paused. "The other 2 members of his crew surfaced in Mexico. They'll probably stay there." Jake nodded, but felt no satisfaction in the news. "There's something else," Agent Santos continued. "We've recovered 12 other victims over the past 2 weeks, all connected to Kellison's operation. Girls who were being held or transported when he was arrested. Your actions saved more lives than just Sarah's." After Agent Santos left, Jake sat alone in his kitchen, trying to process everything that had happened. 12 other girls. 12 families who would get their daughters back because he had happened to be checking fence line that October day. But still, the weight remained. It was Sarah who finally helped him understand what he was feeling. On her last night at the ranch, before her parents drove her back to Oregon, she knocked on his bedroom door around midnight. "Can't sleep either?" she asked when he answered. They went to the kitchen and Jake made coffee while Sarah sat at the table where they had shared so many conversations over the past 2 weeks. "I keep thinking about that moment," Jake said, setting down 2 mugs. "When I had him on the ground. Tom says I did the right thing by stopping. But Sarah, I didn't stop because it was right. I stopped because Tom called my name. If he hadn't been there." "But he was there," Sarah said firmly. "Jake, do you think I haven't thought about what I would have done if I'd had the chance? If I'd had a weapon when he was hurting me?" Jake looked at her, seeing something in her eyes he hadn't noticed before. A hardness that hadn't been there when he first found her. "I would have killed him," she said simply. "Without hesitation. Without regret. Does that make me a monster?" "No," Jake said immediately. "Of course not. Then why does it make you one?" Jake stared into his coffee mug, considering her question. "Because I've spent my whole life believing that taking a life is wrong. Always. No matter the circumstances. And now I don't know what I believe." Sarah reached across the table and took his hand. "Jake, there's a difference between wanting to kill someone for money or power or pleasure, and wanting to kill someone to protect innocent people. One is evil, the other is justice. Is it that simple? Maybe it is. Maybe we complicate it because we're afraid of our own capacity for violence. But Jake, you're a good man. The fact that you're struggling with this, that you're questioning yourself, that proves you're good. Evil men don't have this conversation." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Sarah spoke again. "I'm going to get counseling when I get home. Professional help to deal with what happened to me." "That's smart. You should think about it too. Not because there's anything wrong with you, but because you've been through trauma too. Different than mine, but trauma nonetheless." Jake nodded, already knowing she was right. The next morning, Jake watched Sarah's family drive away, taking with them the quiet companionship that had helped him through the most difficult weeks of his life. The house felt empty and too quiet, but that evening, Sheriff Bradley stopped by with a bottle of whiskey and an invitation to talk. "How you holding up?" Tom asked as they sat on the porch. "Getting by. Sarah thinks I should talk to someone." "Sarah's a smart girl. What do you think?" Jake was quiet for a long time. "I think I need to understand what happened to me out there. Why I felt what I felt. And what it means for who I am going forward." "Sounds like wisdom to me." Over the following months, Jake did seek counseling. Dr. Elizabeth Reese was a psychologist in Billings who specialized in trauma and moral injury. Through their sessions, Jake began to understand that his struggle wasn't with becoming something dark, but with accepting a part of himself that had always existed. The part that would fight, even kill, to protect the innocent. You didn't discover evil in yourself, Jake, Dr. Reese explained during one session. You discovered the warrior that good men sometimes need to become. The struggle you're feeling isn't guilt. It's growth. Growth? You're evolving from someone who lived in a world where good and evil were clear abstractions, to someone who understands that sometimes good people must do terrible things to stop truly evil ones. That's a painful but necessary growth. Jake maintained regular contact with Sarah through letters and occasional phone calls. She was doing well. Back in school, planning to become a social worker, specializing in helping trafficking victims. Her strength and resilience continued to inspire him. 6 months after that October night, Marcus Kellison was sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole. Jake didn't attend the sentencing, but Sheriff Bradley called to tell him the news. How do you feel? Tom asked. Jake considered the question carefully. Satisfied. I think. Not happy. Exactly. But satisfied that justice was served. And the other thing? The questions you've been wrestling with? Still wrestling, Jake admitted. But I'm beginning to understand that some questions don't have clean answers. Maybe the point isn't to find certainty, but to find peace with uncertainty. End quote. A year later, Jake received an unexpected visit. Sarah Chen stood on his porch, older and more confident than when he had last seen her. I was in the area for a conference, she explained. Thought I'd stop by and see how you're doing. They spent the afternoon walking the ranch, talking about her work and his ongoing healing process. As the sun began to set, they found themselves standing near the ridge where Jake had first heard her calling for help. Do you ever regret it? Sarah asked. Getting involved, I mean. Your life was peaceful before that day. Jake thought about the question seriously. The past year had been the most difficult of his life. Filled with sleepless nights, painful self-examination, and a complete reshaping of his understanding of right and wrong. But it had also been a year of growth, of discovering strength he didn't know he possessed, and of forming a bond with Sarah that had enriched his life immeasurably. No, he said finally. I don't regret it. What happened to me, what I learned about myself, it was necessary. I was living in a bubble, thinking the world was simpler than it is. Sarah smiled and squeezed his arm. Thank you, Jake, for everything. As she drove away the next morning, Jake stood on his porch and looked out over his land. The mountains were the same, the cattle were the same, even the fence line was the same. But he was different, fundamentally and permanently changed by a moment of choice that had revealed the depths of both human evil and his own capacity to fight against it. He was no longer just a rancher. He was a guardian, a protector, someone who had looked into darkness and chosen to stand against it. The knowledge was heavy, but it was also empowering. Jake Morrison had discovered who he really was. And while the discovery had shaken him to his soul, it had also set him free.